Remember, these knives are insanely sharp. What I'm doing is I'm knocking the front shoulders off, and then I run right down the spine. Here we go. Each of these ribs, like that. There's a joint in here where the rib can move. Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire. And on this channel, we do a lot of primitive build, hunting, and educational videos just like this one. So if it is your first time to the channel, do please consider subscribing. I'm only going to keep you here for about another 15 or 20 seconds. I just need to preface this video a little bit because you're going to hear me talk about hunt traditional, and you're probably not used to hearing the word hunt traditional versus hunt primitive, which is what we normally do. So for those that do follow me, I want to give a tiny bit of an explanation in that. Hunt traditional is a very small subsidiary of hunt primitive. We have a lot of customers that love all the primitive stuff, but they're also into the traditional things. And so what we're trying to do is offer a little bit of crossover product and a little bit of content as well to kind of service the people that love primitive and love traditional. It's nothing we're going to take too seriously in the future, but as you hear us talk about hunt traditional, that's a product that we've kind of worked up more on the traditional side, so that's what you know what we're kind of getting into. By no means are we getting away from hunt primitive. And I'm going to work you through at least how I break down hogs. Most of the time we use a gutless method on our hogs. We don't save ribs. Usually there's not much to them. She might have a little bit more for ribs, so we might go ahead, knock the guts out of her and take the ribs too. But we'll show you how we break through the process. Not everybody, but at least how our family does it. I actually learned several things from Mark Harrison at Omnivore's Homestead and Quivers, where they pretty much process out and use every teeny tiny piece they possibly can. Your average hunter, we're going to take the big cuts, utilize that, and then of course I take these home and I can them. My kids love pressure canned wild pork. So anyway, first thing I'm going to do with her is we got to get rolling. Pretty nice sized sow, but she's starting to bloat. So we shot her this morning. It's time to kind of get to work on her so she can see how much she's bloating up. So one of the first things I like to do on these hogs is just go ahead. You would believe how much mud, because they're wallowing all the time, and rinse these things down the best you can to try to keep as much dirt and hair and blood and all that grime off of your meat. So we made the incisions already. We'll go ahead and show you how I do that and what the Hunt Traditional knife is all about. So this is the official Hunt Traditional knife, and this is why it's purpose built to be a skinning and boning knife. So we don't want to utilize our best skinning belly over here, skinning edge. But this is what the extended bolster and this slight concave back edge is for, specifically designed. So the extended bolster is going to catch this so it doesn't slide off, and we can ring these joints without ever using our actual cutting edge on bone. And I mean crazy sharp. Spot right there. Make those couple incisions, and here that is. And that's why we designed it specifically this way. It maximizes edge retention and overall function of the blade. So really excited for this knife, and I mean absolutely crazy sharp, 1095 steel, hand forged, beautiful hunting, skinning, and boning knife. So, and now that it's hung up and we've washed it off, now is when we're going to use the real curvature of this skinning blade to go ahead and complete our incision, and then just start working it down, wanting to be careful again that we keep as much hair and grime and all that off the meat as possible, although it's going to happen. We're going to get some. We can wash that later. Alright, so what you're going to notice here is that curvature of that blade really does maximize. We're able to use it from about right here all the way to the tip. So obviously the tip's best for our incision, the extended bolster and slight concave back cutting edge we use to cut around the joints. And then we can maximize the amount of skinning blade that we can run through. Now these things are incredibly sharp, so I'm trying to kind of go slow because otherwise it just rips. I don't care about ripping holes in the hide, quite honestly. Pig hides aren't good for very much. Not like a deer hide where we can save them, brain tan them, and do a lot with them. Pig hides just aren't very good, and they're kind of a dime a dozen. So anyway, remember, these knives are insanely sharp. Just insanely sharp. So watch your fingers on the other side because a tiny cut just blows a hole right through this. So keep that in mind. It's not a big box store knife. The whole idea behind these knives as well is to give you a knife that you can process out a whole animal like this, an entire animal, and never have to stop and sharpen it one single time. So that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with these knives, and they do it, and they do a great job at it. We'll be able to process this entire hog, and I bet you by the time we're done, we'll still be bucking hairs off of our arm with this knife without ever sharpening it one single time. So what we can do here, we're going to bust down through. Here we got some yuckies on there. We're going to wash those off here in 1 second. Let me just get because I don't want that into the meat. What we'll do is we'll cut that through. This is why sometimes you do want to go ahead and gut. Like I said, we were planning on doing a gutless, but she looks like she might have some pretty good ribs, so I might. Now, here as another thing, instead of using your best cutting surface, use that back extended bolster area to cut through where the tail is. So that's it. That was the tailbone. Do you ever struggle with trying to bust through a tailbone? Man, that thing, it'll glide right through it. All right, let me wash that blade off. Okay, good to go there. And then back to business. So we're just going to knock the skin off of her, and then we'll show you boning all the meat off. So hopefully you can see how crazy sharp this is. If you're using it, say like on a deer hide, go slower if you're trying to save the hide. It will blow holes. Not kidding. It's honestly, it's too sharp for skinning if you're worried about saving the hide itself. It is. You're going to end up mad at yourself if you do end up using it for skinning. Look at that, barely touched it and blew through again. So keep that in mind as you get these things and put them to use. We're going to have some great meat on her. Alright, so we did go ahead and knock the guts out of her. Decided I do want to try to save the ribs on this one. Like I said, Buddy Mark at Omnivore's Homestead and Quivers, he saves the ribs. We've never had much luck with wild hog ribs, especially unless they're, you know, a bigger hog that's maybe corn fed or something, which these are not. These are all free range. And but I want to give them a try. He talks about putting them in an Instapot and then to really kind of pressure cook them, and then he'll throw them on the grill just for a little bit of like searing on the outside and a little bit of flavor. So we're going to go ahead and give that a try. So I'll just go ahead and knock the skin off of her the rest of the way, and then we'll start showing you breaking it down, how I do it, and then also, like I said, because we cut it up to pressure can, so it all kind of gets cubed for us. However, I'll go through the process, at least what Mark kind of showed me on splitting these ribs, breaking them, and then being able to keep them. But instead of laying it down on the table, I'm going to do it hanging up. So we'll walk through the process, and at least you can see how we end up taking the meat home. Get down to skinning it this far. I'll go ahead and split this leg up. Catch it. Again, this is what the knife is specifically built for. This part of the edge, so make sure you use that appropriately. And this side too, we'll go ahead and just ring that. Wipe off the blade. Go ahead and make our next incision. Good to go. And then I don't bother trying to skin around the leg. The leg will skin itself as you work down these sides like this. See? Right down to the base of the skull. About like that. Okay, now what I'll do is I'm going to go through and I'll cut off any super bloody pieces and hose that off, clean this up, and then we'll knock the meat off. Actually, while I'm here, let's go ahead and use that spot on the extended bolster. Perfect spot again. Sometimes I hit it better than others. I hit it really good that time. And then that ligament right there. Easy peasy. Now we'll go ahead and rinse it off a little bit more. We'll start yanking some meat off. All right, now I'm a few hours from home and we have good access to a freezer here. So I take a garbage bag and lay it out. And I put all the meat in the garbage bag because I can freeze it solid in the freezer and then it's its own ice in the cooler as we go home. That's how I do it. If you just want to throw it on ice, that's perfectly fine. But then you'll understand at least what I'm doing with it. And then I'm going to get home and then I will butcher it there. And that will be a different video as we completely cut it up and show you what I'm doing, process that out. At this point in time, what I'm doing is I'm knocking the front shoulders off. There's no bone connection here. They'll just fillet off. And I tried to say there's a piece of meat under here too. I try to keep that piece because I still use that. It's a little bit tough, but when you run it through the pressure canner, it's perfectly fine. So we'll just go ahead and fold these whole shoulders right off because it's a little bit easier to bone them clean once they're laying on a table like this, and then we can get all the meat off here that we want. So I'll bring the front shoulders home whole, but that's the only part that I bring home that's whole. Everything else, like I said, I'll bone out or break apart to save on space. So again, there's that piece of meat that's right here. So cut that really close to the rib cage and save that piece right there. Don't forget about that one. Nice little chunk of meat. All right, so now when I'm doing the back straps, I'm going to, there's a bone right here, come in right up under that bone, and you'll see there's like a little crease in the muscle between like the sirloin, I think that's what that's called up here. So I'm going to cut this straight across and up under. Just follow where the bone is. And then I run right down the spine, all the way to the bone, and then carry that all the way down into the neck, the whole way. And I cut that off with the back strap in itself. Now the back straps, if they've got a pretty decent back strap on them and it's not a boar, not a rankle boar, I'll save that and we'll grill that separate. But more times than not, I'll bust all of this up and we'll pressure can every bit of it. So now I come in on the inside, get rid of some of that extra fat we don't need. And I'm going to come in on this side of the spine and start right here and hugging close to the bone. Just like that. Pretty much about as close to the bone as I can get it. And I'm going to walk that all the way down that edge of the ribs. just like that. Make sure you're clicking bone with the tip of your knife, that way you know you're all the way through it. And then come back, and now you just kind of work it right there, in between the vertebrae, just get it to release, just like that. There we go. There's one really nice back strap, so we'll just fold that in half, put that in our bag to freeze solid. Of course, we have a really cold deep freeze here, so we don't have to worry about the meat actually spoiling in the freezer while it's wrapped up. If you've got a low temperature freezer or one that's set low, it could potentially spoil for the amount of time that it takes that meat to freeze. So keep that in mind. We don't have that problem here. It'll freeze it solid, and the whole thing solid in just a couple hours. So here's same deal here, under that blade, click it down, right here is that piece. Use my thumb to walk around, just don't cut your thumb. See, once you get a little faster at doing it, you can zip these apart pretty quick. And there's not a ton of meat comparative to a deer. There's not as much meat on a pig, and I think folks are surprised to hear that because a pig's kind of a bigger animal, but they got a lot of bones, a lot of guts, and a lot of hide. The backstrap on a pig like this is not as impressive as a deer, so we try to get as much as we possibly can off of it, because we're only going to get maybe, I would conservatively say, 2/3 the amount of meat off of a pig that we would a deer at best. It might even be a little bit more, like half. Alright, so we've got that. Now we'll come in here and I want to trim the stuff off these tenderloins. Pig tenderloins are not very big. They're kind of like a hot dog, but they're still good meat, so you might as well take them, and they only take a second. I cut on either side like that, and then I can stick my finger right behind them, walk it up, and it'll release itself, and then pull that out. So that's a little piece of meat, but it's a good little piece of meat. So when we do the gutless method, a lot of times that's on smaller pigs, or even boars, or something that's gut shot. You don't want to get it's already kind of tainted these. Since it's such a small piece of meat, it's just not that important for us to get like a little hot dog out unless it's really convenient for us, if you know what I'm saying. So there we go. That one's done. Let me drop her down here a little bit more for you. Alright, I'll pull you in here a little bit closer so I can show you how I'm doing this. Now, the way I do it on a deer and the way I do it on a pig is two different things. Like I said, we cube pretty much all of this up and run it through a pressure canner. So I'm not as concerned about following the muscle groups as I am when I'm doing a deer. But as if I was doing this for a deer, I'll show you. Or if you simply are not going to pressure can it and want it in nicer steaks, go ahead and trim some of our wild fat. Wild fat, in my opinion, is not as good as, you know, good store-bought pork. So I'm not real big into the fat deposits on a wild hog because they're eating bugs and grubs and everything else. So you can see where there's a muscle group here. I will follow that muscle group right down to the bone. And I'm not a professional meat cutter, as you know. I'm just a hunter. So I'm going to follow that muscle group right here as well. And I believe that this is a sirloin. Could be wrong. Somebody can confirm or deny that. I don't care about the terminology so much. But I'm going to take it right down to the bone and follow it up around here. And kind of separate right off the bone as close as I can. I'm not fanatical about every single tiny piece. And you know who's really good about this is Allison at Omnivores that I've talked about before. you know, she'll go through and she saves everything. She makes a bone broth out of everything. So, I mean, they'll take all of these bones and boil them down to get all of the little scraps of meat off of it. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of time invested in doing that. So that's no small undertaking. But they're passionate about doing it and using every bit that they can. And so I say more power to them. You know, we're killing several pigs, you know, in an outing, or, you know, in a year, let's say, kill several pigs in a year. We're not typically running through every teeny tiny little piece, but we're getting some good chunks of meat off of it. We don't really want to waste it, but at the end of the day, you can put in a ton of work to not get very much off. You know what I'm saying? So, okay, I'll do this one later, but I'm going to separate this one up here and go right down to the bone. Okay, so you'll notice that there's a muscle group that runs right here, so I'm going to go ahead and take that and get rid of this hair. It's stuck on it. Take that down right to the pelvic bone, split it right down the center. It's a great piece of meat right here. Take your time to get that off really nice. And then this one, I don't cut it again. I'll wrap all the way around the bone. Right off the femur. And then come out this side. Cut that off. Ding. Almost there. Up this side of the pelvis, try to get some of this hair off. We can wash that off later too, not a big deal, but I want to follow that bone really tight, save as much of the meat as we can. And since it is going into a pressure canner, it doesn't hurt to come back and clean up. Here, I'll show you in a second. So we took that whole piece off. We come back in places like this and we'll go ahead and clean up. There's not much on that piece there. There's one piece there and a little piece there. So pressure cannon, I will make some good use of those pieces, because they'll add up. By the time we're done with this, the little tag end pieces, that'll be an extra can of meat by the time it's all said and done. Now the shank piece, we'll save that for last, just because we don't want to cut the tendon and drop our animal down. And so you can tell I'm not a professional meat cutter. I am a guy that processes his own at home, and I've got a lot of work in the workshop to do. Time is money. So of course, if you're a professional butcher, you're going to look at this and say, oh yeah, he's doing that totally wrong. But at the end of the day, we eat it, it works. And this is how your average guy at home is going to end up running his meat. Okay? So we've got that handled, all the meat's off of here. We're down to some pretty bare scraps. So then this shank meat is one of those, or, you know, down in here in the calf, I should say, probably not necessarily with the shank. I don't mind. Actually, let's go ahead and let's raise it back up real fast. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and split this rib cage the rest of the way up, which I think I already did. Yep, pretty darn close. And I'm going to cut it right in here like this. Okay, and just start working through that vertebrae and starting to separate that a little bit. Now here's the trick that I learned from Mark, that you basically come in and you score these bones. Okay. And hopefully, let's see how it works. That'll release them. Okay, no saw needed. That way there's no bone chips in your ribs. And now we're going to take, again, this little concave area that's better for bone on bone, and just start working down in between each of these ribs like that. There's a joint in here where the rib can move, and that's what we did, is we broke that joint. So now we just have to tap it essentially, and we can pull these ribs right off without having to saw them and get bone chips everywhere. There we go. And that should finish it off. Easy peasy right there. And so there, now what we can do is just clean this up. Clean up some of the fat and stuff that's on it. But otherwise, other than having fractured rib from shooting right there, that'd be a pretty decent little rack of ribs. And that was a neat trick that he talked about. I haven't tried it yet, but you grab it and you can actually roll these up now so they're smaller, and then actually fit them right in an Instapot, whatever that thing is. I'll have to get one. Sounds interesting. So we're going to save those. I'll go ahead and pull the other side. Alright, so the only thing that's left now is going to be these calf pieces. Now keep in mind, these are absolutely loaded with sinew, and they're a bit of an issue. You can pressure cook that out, and or you can put them, say, in a crock pot. You can do all kinds of different stuff with them. Typically, if they're not very big, I won't save them, just because the juice ain't worth the squeeze, if you know what I'm saying. So you work all that for very little meat. Some folks really like them, actually. I'm not one. Okay, just like that. And then we can come up and okay. Get rid of the leg. And then you've got that whole piece there. And said some people saw them, what is it, Ossobuco or whatever. I'm not a big culinary guy, let's put it that way. Alright, so we got our pig knocked down. I got one more little calf piece there. We're going to knock that out. But again, that's the official hunt traditional knife. And I tell you what, it's hard to beat that thing. So even after that whole thing, cutting through bone and everything, we're still, you can't see it on the camera, I can't imagine, still shaving hair. Not as cleanly, but it is. You can see the hair on the arm. Shaving that right off. Unbelievable. That sharp. So now when it comes time to sharpening this, we'll do it a couple times. Personally, I'll run it on a buffing wheel, about 2 passes, and it is right back to crazy sharp. That'll be a different video for a different day. Alright guys, thanks for following along today. Hopefully walking you through our pig breakdown. Professional hunter, amateur butcher. But that's the kind of stuff that you need to know at home to process your own wild game kills. Deer, hogs, bear, whatever you want. It all pretty much goes about the same. Get you a good knife, even if you don't get one of these. Make sure you have a good one. Nothing is more miserable than taking a piece of crap knife that you have to sharpen every 3 seconds just to get the dang hide off of it. So anyway, thanks for following along. We're going to catch you on the next adventure.